All right, today is Man Up Monday. On the phone, we salute Dr. Michael Lindsay. He's the director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty, Policy, and Research. Education is one of the greatest tools in the fights for equality, so Dr. Michael Lindsay is hoping to change that narrative for black boys and men throughout the educational podcast and informative series of conversations about everything from LGBTQ issues to mental health solutions to the legal justice system. And all those acronyms are great things about black men. All those words of affirmation, positive words of affirmation. Dr. Michael Lindsay?
Yes. It's great to be here, and thank you for this courageous conversation, as I frame it, because if we can't talk about something, it's out of control. The podcast series was the brainchild of one of our talented staff members, Jason Jones, at the McSilver Institute. But we wanted to have a podcast that brought together thought leaders to analyze stereotypes and dispel myths about black men and boys, while also providing facts and best practices for those working with them. We wanted the series to address systemic racism and oppression and provide concrete steps to prevent many of the issues that disproportionately affect black boys and men, including health disparities, incarceration, trauma, and violence.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Most of our people will say that we're perfect. So why is it so important that we change the narrative of ourselves for them?
Well, I think that we all can benefit, for example, from therapy. We've been socialized historically to think that if you go and talk to someone outside of your family or outside of your church community, it means that you couldn't handle things. We have all kinds of stigmas and stereotypes around, talking to formal mental health professionals. And I think that it really is a disservice to our well-being. I mean, much in the same way that we go to the doctor annually to get a checkup with respect to our physical health, we should check in about our mental health and really try to address the things that sometimes we're not even aware of, be that, family histories of trauma or other sorts of pain, or whether we're struggling with the daily life of sort of being a person of color, experiencing microaggressions and those sort of things. I mean, we have to have that place to process and talk about these things. And so that's one of the sort of, underlying features of this podcast is that we wanted to encourage black men, those who love black men, those who work with black men, to be able to have this, courageous conversation about things that we typically don't talk about.
Dr. Lindsay, I have to tell you, every time you turn on the television, it's always something negative about our black men on TV when we're listening. How do we change that in our community, the conversations we need to be having at home?
Well, there's a couple things there. I think how do we change the conversation broadly is essentially the spirit of the podcast. We also had a companion piece to the podcast, which was a social impact campaign, where we, talked to a cross-section of people and asked them, give us one word that comes to mind when you reflect on black boys and men. And so, it gave us that opportunity to curate these kind of conversations around the different aspects of, what impacts black boys and men. So I think having those outlets and conversations are really important, whether that happens in the faith community, whether that happens in our social circles with sororities and fraternities, whatever the case may be, right? We have to have these conversations, and certainly your platform offers that. I think in the home, it's just really important to kind of check in with kids and get a sense of how things are going for them at school or, in their social circles. Just encouraging caregivers and family members to talk about things. What we find is that when people report that they have a high degree of social support, being that they could go and talk to a family member if something is of concern to them, or they feel that love from their social network. It really buffers or protects them from having mental health issues, and so that in and of itself becomes really critical.
Let me ask you, and how do you get them to break down that barrier? I mean, those positive words of affirmation are so important. I mean, immediately, do they take to that? Does it take some time to trust you?
Yeah, I mean, it does take time. I think that we owe it to ourselves and to our loved ones to check in with them about, sort of things that are happening in their lives. We are so fixated to this sort of rat race where we're just going, and not really checking in. And so opening up an opportunity to have these conversations are really important. I mean, it's a small thing, it seems like, but it's really critical for caregivers and family members to check in with one another and have those conversations. In the therapeutic context, of course, an individual may not be, sort of forthright about what's happening in their lives when they go into treatment, and so it takes time. Right. It shouldn't be something that's rushed or forced. It just creating the opportunity is really, really critical.
This is Dr. Michael Lindsay, Director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research. How can we hear your podcast?
Yes, we are on several platforms, including Google Play Music, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. So if you go to those platforms and search for Black Boys and Men Changing the Narrative, you will find the 14-part podcast.
Dr. Michael Lindsay, thank you so much. I appreciate you, okay?
Thank you so much.
Black Boys are...